Hey there and welcome back to another Pixar video. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the film Up and how it is Pixar's greatest movie of all time, at least in my opinion. Now, I know that these sort of grand statements can be a bit contentious, and that really this sort of thing is quite subjective. Everybody has their own thoughts about what makes a good film. Everybody has their own opinions on what goes into a Pixar film. Some people like visuals, some people like story, character development, humour, drama. Hell, for some people, I'm sure that the score is the most important element of the film. But for me, I don't think there's any one thing that's more important than the others. For me, and I think a lot of other people, these elements all combine equally to make a masterpiece of a film. Which brings me back to Pixar. Because much like there are many opinions on what goes into a great film, there are many different opinions on what goes into a great Pixar film, and thus, there are many different opinions on which Pixar film is the best Pixar film. And obviously, if you've read the title of the video, or if you've looked at the thumbnail, or remember what I said literally moments ago, you'd know that for me, Up is the definitive Pixar film, the best of the bunch. The one that stands heads and shoulders above the rest, and sets the standard against which I judge any films that have come before or after. Some people will say Toy Story, or The Incredibles, or Finding Nemo or Ratatouille, but in my admittedly biased opinion, there's only one correct answer, and that is Up. And for those of you who may have forgotten, or perhaps are not all that familiar with the film itself, Up tells the story of Carl, a balloon salesman who, as a child, met Allie. With the two bonding over their excitement and love of exploration, the famous explorer Charles Muntz, and the mysterious Paradise Falls. And over time they fell in love and got married, and both of them got jobs working at the local zoo. Carl as a balloon salesman, and Allie as a tour guide. After a miscarriage, the two refocus their life goals and dedicate themselves to eventually visiting Paradise Falls together. But a series of setbacks throughout their life continually stifle their plans until eventually, well into their twilight years, Carl decides to bite the bullet and book the trip, only for Allie to die before they can go. In the aftermath of this, Carl's left alone, and his world continues to change as the houses surrounding his are bought out and demolished, leaving him as the sole real estate holdout in the area, preventing more development. Tensions flare between him and the developers, and after a violent confrontation, he's ordered to go and live in a court-mandated retirement facility. Rightfully thinking, no thanks, Carl decides to attach an immense number of helium balloons to his house and turns it into a makeshift hot air balloon, except not using hot air. And he embarks on a journey to Paradise Falls with wilderness explorer / Boy Scout Russell, an 8-year-old boy, acting as an unwilling stowaway who Carl's unable to take home due to a storm which immediately sweeps him off to South America. And I have only just thought about this, but his poor mum must have been so worried that her son just up and disappeared for what's likely a few days. I mean, an actual hot air balloon would take days to travel such a distance. The USA to Venezuela is not a short trip by those standards. Especially since Carl's house and town are inspired by Seattle, right? I think that's the story. I think I read that somewhere. And using very basic Google Maps, Seattle to Venezuela is like 4,000 miles. Hot air balloons travel quite slowly, like 5 to 10 miles per hour? Even accounting for the storm wind helping push them along, that's still a couple of days of flying in the house. And that's flying there, then they're there for a day or so, and then they have to fly back in the blimp at the end. Whew, poor mum. Carl's getting arrested for kidnapping. Anyway, the pair find themselves quite a walk away from Paradise Falls, and so have to pull the house along themselves, which is how they encounter Kevin, a large, colourful, flightless bird that Charles Muntz claims to have discovered years before and had gone missing searching for again, as well as finding a dog, Doug, who can speak using a special collar that turns his thoughts into words. Along the way, they encounter a whole pack of talking dogs who lead them to a Zeppelin owned by Charles Muntz, who's somehow still alive. Dude must be held together by sticky tape and hatred by this point. And it turns out that the dude's crazy, and he wants to capture Kevin and attacks him, which forces Carl to choose between his house or his new friends. And at first, he chooses the house, until a note from Allie telling him to live a new adventure after she's gone makes him realise his mistakes, and so he sacrifices his home to save Russell and Kevin, and Muntz conveniently dies. It's for the best. The group return to the city, and along with all the other dogs, form a little surrogate family alongside Russell's mum. And it's a happy ending for everyone! Oh god, I love this movie. And so did the world. It did very well from both a commercial and a critical point of view. In terms of its box office success, it grossed $735 million off of a budget of $175 million, and was one of the highest grossing films of 2009. And in terms of its critical success, it earned a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes from 298 reviews, and an 88 out of 100 on Metacritic, so not too shabby if I do say so myself. It's clear that the world firmly believed that this was a truly terrific movie. And so now, I suppose I should dive into why I think it's so good, and more importantly, why I think it's Pixar's magnum opus. And we'll start with the characters. They have depth. They are diverse, they're all interesting and unique, and they have their own arcs that play out over the course of the film. And we'll start with Carl, and we see him grow the most throughout the course of the film. In simply that opening, we see so much growth. He starts off as a timid little kid who loves exploration and adventure, and who falls in love with his childhood friend Allie. She helps him to come out of his shell, to grow into a man who can stand on his own 2 feet, but who retains the kind heart and sweet temperament of his youth. And then, after her death, he goes from this kindly man to somebody who has no will to live, who's tired and depressed and grumpy, angry at the world for taking away his beloved wife before her time. And this is just within, the first 10 minutes of the film itself? Because over the course of the rest of the film, whilst he retains much of his grumpy temperament, he begins to soften towards Russell and Doug, and begins to view them as a bit of a surrogate family. And so, with guidance from his deceased wife, he's able to open up his heart to them, and let the grumpy front melt away where they're concerned. And I really love his growth as a character. He isn't really likable for much of the movie, but there are flashes of the man that he used to be that give you hope he can change. And these become more pronounced as the film goes along, and he's reminded of the person that he used to be. And it's a very satisfying character arc. But he's not the only character that's worthy of recognition. Russell! What a great character! He doesn't really have much development per se, but his story drives the narrative. He's not a typical hero. He's a chubby little Boy Scout. He's timid, he's reckless, but he can also be very annoying. But on the other hand, he's unrelenting in his pursuit of justice and his desire to protect Kevin. And thus he drives the narrative, and drives Carl's character's development. Without Russell, Carl has no arc. It is Russell's youthful determination that reminds Carl of Allie, and inspires Carl to be a better man, to try and regain what he's lost. And in the end, Russell's lack of a present father figure allows the two of them to create a very deep bond, and a grandfather-grandson relationship develops between them, and gives the film a lot of heart and narrative substance. But even aside from these two major players, the side characters are a whole lot of fun as well. Charles Muntz is the deranged explorer who returns to Paradise Falls in disgrace to try and prove he wasn't making up the existence of this giant flightless bird. Doug, the sweet dog who only wants to do the best for his master and is obsessed with squirrels. Even down to more minor characters like Alpha, who just add a bit more flavour and a few jokes here and there. I don't think there's a single character from the list of major appearances that doesn't add to the film in some way. Nobody feels unnecessary or like they drag down the narrative flow. And speaking of the narrative, the writing in this film is simply phenomenal. The narrative is beautifully crafted. The dialogue is concise, and each character has a clear voice that differentiates them from the others. The story doesn't drag, and each act or episode of the narrative flows seamlessly into the next. Of particular note is the opening sequence, where there's almost no dialogue, simply music as we see Carl and Allie's married life together, progressing through their adult life into their elderly years and culminating with Allie's death. It's such a powerful scene, and a masterclass in screenwriting that's made more impressive by the lack of speaking, the lack of dialogue. You have to watch the action play out on screen and see the emotions and the story. You don't get hints as to what's happening. But anyway, enough gushing about that scene. Let's go back to the narrative for just a moment. I loved how layered the story is. On one hand, it's about a man and a boy who save a bird. That's the bare bones story. But when you look deeper, it's about letting go of grief and moving on with your life. Muntz is who Carl will become if he abandons Russell and Kevin, if he chooses to grieve Allie forever and not try to find that spark of life again. And so their battle in the end is about these two opposing viewpoints, looking back or looking forward, and Carl being forced to choose between them. And then this combines with top tier visuals and a score that just stays with you to craft the greatest Pixar film of all time, bar none. And so, with that, I think I'll leave it there. And I'll remind you that these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Up? Is it as good as I say, or do you think there are other Pixar films that are better than this one? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.